verse my parents used at my dedication was Jeremiah 1:5, which says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." My parents named me Kevin because it means kind and gentle. I hope that at the end of my life, I fulfilled both of these. The real adventure of my life started the summer before my junior year in high school. There was many sources of stress in my life. My family has left a legacy of brilliance, and it's been tough to live up to. Getting good grades has never come natural for me, and so it's been very stressful. I was also about to go on a missions trip to Africa. We were going to be serving for 4 weeks, mainly in Zambia, but also in Kenya, working at an orphanage. Little did I know that this trip would change my life in ways I could never imagine. Take this cup from me. As all the stress started to build up, so did the depression inside of me. Leading to the trip, I started to struggle with depression. Occasionally, the thought of ending my life seemed like a tempting option. It seemed like the quickest and easiest way to get away from all the struggles that life had to offer. I never really told anyone because I normally keep those things to myself. I've always tried to keep up the image of being the happy-go-lucky Kevin that most of you know. This led to an extreme buildup of emotions and struggle. The main problem with all of this was that I never went to God with my problems. People can help a lot with struggles in many ways, but God is essential to overcome any difficulty. One night in particular stood out to me. It was the last night of the trip. I was at the lowest emotional state I've ever been in my life. I was sitting outside a resort in Kenya. Life seemed like what I imagined hell to be. Everything positive in my mind somehow turned into a negative. Everything good wasn't anymore. And I was sitting alone, crying. I wrote a note explaining everything going on in my head. It also explained the actions I was about to commit to. That night, I had a knife in my other hand, and I planned to end my life. Yet not as I will. And as I sat there crying, feeling more alone, I started screaming to God. I looked up to the heavens and I saw nothing. I prayed that God would just let me alone so I could leave the world in peace. God never gave me what I wanted. Constantly, the Maasai guards would walk back and forth, occasionally asking me questions. And then finally, when I thought I was going to be alone, a good friend came up and talked to me. I told him a little bit about the struggles that I was going through. God used him to speak to me that night. And for a little while, I had peace. I went to bed that night and eventually came back home. I needed that more than ever. One of the greatest lessons I learned from that experience was to never take struggles alone. God puts people in your life, and at times he uses them to help you out. I should have never tried to carry all the struggles on my own without telling my friends or family, but most of all, I should have gone to God. I should have been presenting all my problems to God. Philippians 1:18-19 says, "Yes, and I will continue to rejoice, for what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. It is through your prayers and the Spirit of Jesus Christ." This verse is a demonstration that Paul needed the prayers of others and the Spirit of Jesus Christ to get through his struggle and to turn it into a greater purpose. But your will be done. Another thing that I learned firsthand was that when we pray, God will grant our needs, not our desires. I know this because I'm here right now. If God had let me be alone that night, who knows what would have happened? God knew what I needed, and that was to never be alone. The experience has forced me to grow. I became a stronger person, and I think Europe semester is a testament of this. Instead of a 4-week-long trip, this was 3.5 months. I was tested once again, and at times depression would hit me. But this time I knew how to fight it. The acronym HALT stands for hunger, anger, loneliness, tiredness. It's a constant reminder for me, and it's something that helped me out in Europe semester. I would always write that on my hand. When things started getting tougher on the trip, I went through a life-changing experience. On October 13th, on a bus ride to Poland, God spoke to me in a way that I'll always remember. I started to break down, and in the midst of many distractions, God explained some things to me, and he also gave me new life. A simple way to put it was second wind. It was essential for my well-being later in the trip. When I heard the news that our house burnt down, I had already been struggling. There was many journal entries that I'd written down about how I just needed a break. But God gave me some shocking news. Hearing about the fires in our house left me with a very helpless feeling. I just couldn't do anything. But I think God used my family through it. A lot of good came from it, though it was an intense struggle. The day after the news, I remember very well. It was a tough day for my family, but we arrived at the Garden of Gethsemane. There was a verse there that said, from Matthew 26:39, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but your will be done." I love this verse. And for that day, it brought comfort to my family, especially my mom. Even Jesus struggled. This verse is proof of it. But in the end, he went through with his Father's will. The last thing I want to say is that when you guys are going through struggle, look at it in a different way. Look at it as an honor that God has chosen you to go through that struggle. God never gives you more than what you can handle, and so God has deemed you worthy of that struggle. Make God proud. Thank you.
What's up, Westmont? I'm a senior and my name is Charlie Ziegenhagen, but you can all call me Little Chuck. Now, I haven't always liked this nickname, but as I began to think about it from a spiritual perspective, it really has grown on me. You see, the name Little Chuck has some truth to it. I'm the oldest of 3 brothers, but also the shortest. I don't really like speaking in front of large groups of people because it makes me very nervous, and I don't have that many special talents. But despite all this, God can use me very powerfully. Because when God uses me to do something big, I know, and the people around me know, that it's not by my own strength that I'm able to do these things, but only by the power of God. For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. My story really begins in the 4th grade when I joined my first real competitive basketball team. I'd loved playing sports, and I thought that this was going to be a great experience. However, it turned out to be one of the worst experiences of my young life. My coach was a major hothead, and whenever I messed up, he would yell and cuss at me. Growing up in a loving family, I was simply unprepared for this kind of confrontation, and I began to develop a deep fear of making mistakes. At home, I would practice basketball for hours, determined not to make a mistake at the following practice. But of course, such a goal is impossible, and as a result, I began to develop an attitude of perfectionism in athletics. This was a good thing at first, and I really began to excel in sports. But on the other hand, one bad play was enough to take me out of the game mentally. By the time I reached high school, this perfectionism had carried over into every aspect of my life. I would never raise my hand in class for fear that my peers would think my ideas were stupid. Things as common as meeting new people were the source of great anxiety for me. And whenever I made a mistake in any area, I would never be able to let it go. And all day long, I'd be constantly thinking about what I could have done differently. However, despite all of this, I was still very excited about playing on the high school football and basketball teams. After all, I'd been working towards this my whole life. My freshman year was incredible, and I really began to excel in both football and basketball. However, my sophomore year, I began to notice some serious breathing difficulties when I was engaged in athletics. And I couldn't give 100% anymore, which for a perfectionist, nothing could be harder. It was during that summer that I really began to get into partying. I probably liked drinking more than any of my friends, because when I was drunk, I could be the person I always wanted to be. I hated living under the fear of making mistakes and caring so much about what people thought about me. But when I was drunk, I was free from all that, and I could be the confident, funny individual that I'd never been before. This brought me popularity and attention from girls that I'd never had, and soon I began partying all the time. One point that I should add is that I grew up in a Christian home, and I believed in Jesus as my Savior. However, I wasn't about to live for him, because I thought that he would take away the things I enjoyed, like partying, and because I didn't believe God was as good as people said he was. But though I had no idea at the time, God still cared for me, even though I could have cared less about him. Philippians 1:6 says, "He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it." God began a good work in me when I became a Christian. In the Bible it says that he will be faithful to complete that work. My junior year, I developed intense stomach problems to add to the breathing complications. I went to a dozen different doctors, but none of them were able to help me. However, the last doctor that I went to thought that both my breathing and stomach problems were the result of major stress, a theory that I have now come to accept. My senior year, I had to quit the basketball team, which was devastating. I just could not play at a competitive level anymore. However, I told myself that if I could not be an athlete, that I would at least look like one, and began lifting weights regularly. Soon it was time to head off to college, and when I got here, I partied harder than ever, often visiting the infamous Isla Vista. Also, Because Westmont was a more academically challenging environment than high school, my perfectionism in schoolwork was taken to new heights. But if you couldn't find me studying or at a party, you could most likely find me in the weight room. Whereas before, all my happiness was wrapped up in partying and sports, now it was all centered on partying and my image. However, it seemed like bad things kept happening to me my first year of college while I was at parties, to the extent that one of my friends used to joke around that I was cursed. At this one party, one of my friend's younger brothers, who was in high school, was with us. That particular night, I had quite a bit to drink, and I decided to leave with this girl. However, my friend's younger brother tried to stop me because he knew how drunk I was. I told him to get out of my face and to go back to high school. But he was persistent, and I decided I wanted to fight him. However, something I failed to mention before was that this guy was a 6'4" football player, and despite my efforts in the weight room, still much bigger than myself. I aimed to punch him in the face, but because he was so much taller than me and I was drunk, I ended up only hitting him in the chest. Little Chuck had just made a big mistake. Needless to say, he won the fight, and my physical body as well as my reputation suffered as a result. Things didn't improve at all when the summer after my freshman year began. Due to my breathing issues, even lifting weights was becoming harder on my breathing and my stomach as well. One day I got back from the gym after failing to finish a seemingly easy workout and just broke into tears. I felt like all the things that had once brought happiness to my life had now gone away. I could no longer play sports. Partying wasn't the same. And now I couldn't even maintain my image through working out. But despite all of this, and even though I had nowhere else to turn, I still refused to turn to God. One night after coming back from another party, I decided to write a prayer in this journal that had been accumulating dust by my bed. The prayer simply said, "Lord, help me to get on the right path." However, I was so drunk that night that I had no recollection of ever writing it. 2 weeks later, my brother Max, who was leading a slightly different lifestyle, got back from a missions trip. My mom decided to have a reunion at our house for all the people that went on the trip. I promised her I would be there, and I was amazed at the different testimonies people shared about what God had done. I was so inspired that I told God that I would not go out to this party the following night. However, when the high of that experience wore off, I decided to go to the party anyways. And it was at that party that God used one of the worst events in my life to finally get my attention. I'm not going to talk about what happened, but it was so painful because it helped me realize what I had become. And the next morning, I woke up more scared, stressed, ashamed, and depressed than I've ever felt in my life. The only thing I could think to do was grab that dusty prayer journal by my bed. I grabbed it, opened it up, and there was that prayer, the one that I hadn't even remembered writing. Lord, help me to get on the right path. I thanked God with tears in my eyes because I knew that He had used that incredibly hard situation to answer my prayer. And I began thanking God for all the struggles He had allowed in my life because they had all been used to get me to the place where I was at that morning, a place where I was finally ready to begin living for Jesus. But you might say, Charlie, I remember partying with you sophomore year. In fact, we went stupid, dumb, and hyphy. But you'd be right. And it was after that summer, when I came back to Westmont, I really slipped up. God was calling me to share about what He had done in my life. And I was never willing to do it because I was afraid that I would lose all my friends in the process. But God calls us to do things that we would never want to do. And He allows us to go through struggles that we would never want to experience so that we can become the people we've always wanted to be. Since the 4th grade, I'd wanted to be a confident man. And I would have never asked for the struggles that God had allowed in my life, but I was thankful for them. And while I didn't want to do the things that God had called me to do, I knew God had used them to finally get me to the place where I could become, at least begin to become, a confident person, which had been my struggle my whole life. And the following summer, I finally obeyed God, and I decided to share my testimony with a group of high school students. After that, I began stepping outside of my comfort zone on a regular basis. And I did things like take public speaking, led a Bible study, and shared my story frequently. And now today, the same kid who usually won't even participate in class stands in front of his whole school and shares. And God has shown me that one day I will be a pastor. I may be little Chuck, but I'm bigger than life because the same power that rose Jesus Christ from the dead, that caused him to overcome this life, is in me. And if you want to live life with the power of Jesus, if you want a life that is so radically beautiful and changed by God, but you feel like you could never change, I just ask you to do one simple thing. Pray the prayer that I prayed. Lord, help me to get on the right path. And if you really mean it, God will do it, even if you don't remember praying it. That's it.